I'm starting up a protest. We have to live here as part of the job. We're forced to live here under our contract. The charge is rent. I'm starting up a Facebook protest. Join. Actually, I started a Facebook protest, so some of my colleagues were looking at me quite bewilderedly, because they wasn't sure what Facebook was. I said I'd Twitter it, but again, that seemed to be lost. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to start a Facebook protest. We have to pay rent. I have to pay, ladies and gentlemen, £100 a month for living in a massive house in the outside walls of the Tower of London. I feel your sympathy waning at this particular stage. For those of you I can see over there who are not laughing, this is English sarcasm. We do have to pay rent, yes, just a small amount. Right, ladies and gentlemen, you and I now have something in common. We're all now standing in the outer ward or outer ballium of the Tower of London, in between the two defensive walls. Behind me, the inner wall's 50 feet high. Behind you, the outer wall, 28 feet thick, running between the two here. This road is called Mint Street. Called Mint Street because this is where all the coins the realm and his own are minted up until the year 1810. Fact number 2, Mint Street, just there, that was the home of Sir Isaac Newton when he was the master of the mint. Behind you and to your right, you can see the Sally Port or Royal Entrance. Now, in the days when London had little more their rough uneven tracks, royalty would prefer to travel by the River Thames. Mooring their royal barge at the side of that wall, they'd cross over a small drawbridge, making their entrance in the Tower of London via that archway. On the 29th of May, 1533, Henry VIII stood there, awaiting the arrival of his second wife, Anne Boleyn. She was coming to the Tower of London in preparation for her coronation on the 1st of June. As Anne steps into that archway, Henry steps forward, embracing his new wife. The story goes then, ladies and gentlemen, he promises to love her for the rest of her life. All right, to be fair, he does. All 3 years of it, 3 years later, Anne Boleyn was brought back to the Tower of London for a very different gateway, and obviously for very different reasons. She must have liked her second stay, for she's still here, ladies and gentlemen. She's in the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula. She's one of the lucky ones. She has her head with her. It was forced under her arm after she was executed. Behind me, ladies and gentlemen, is the bell tower, built during the reign of Richard I, Richard the Lionheart. It was called the bell tower because on top is a belfry. Inside the belfry is the oldest surviving curfew bell in the City of London. It dates from 1651. That bell will be rung as a warning. Now, when it was rung, the gates will be closed, the defence is manned. But it was also rung 1 hour before every execution. The bell tower, ladies and gentlemen, is the oldest and strongest surviving of the 13 towers that make up the inner defensive wall. It comprises of 2 chambers, one on top of the other, which themselves are used to house many famous prisoners. Some examples of prisoners held within the bell tower. In the lower chamber, Sir Thomas More, the Lord Chancellor. And in the upper chamber, at the same time, his good friend John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester. Both men imprisoned in the Tower of London for refusing to recognise Henry VIII as head of the Church of England. I told you my range was strange, and that was good as my word. While John Fisher was here at the Tower of London, ladies and gentlemen, he was elevated to cardinal by the Roman Catholic Church. Legend also has it that Henry vowed before his cardinal hat arrived from Rome, he wouldn't have a head to put it on. And both the men were taken up to Tower Hill, 1535, to have their heads removed from their bodies. On the 22nd of June, actually, Fisher, isn't it? It's coming up soon, isn't it? He was executed on the 22nd of June. You're getting all this free, I'm just chucking this in. Both of these men, ladies and gentlemen, also reside at the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula, but their heads, ladies and gentlemen, are elsewhere. Both of these men were canonised as saints in 1935 by the Roman Catholic Church. Also kept in the bell tower, but in the upper chamber, was the young Princess Elizabeth, the half-sister of Queen Mary. Both of the girls the daughters of Henry VIII, Mary being the daughter of Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, whereas Elizabeth was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's second wife. Now, when Mary the First, or Bloody Mary as she became known, sorry kids, swearing, it's still PG though. When Bloody Mary was Queen of England, there were many plots against her life. Now, she thought her sister Elizabeth was involved in the Thomas White Rebellion of 1554, had her imprisoned here. But after 2 months, she could find no evidence of her sister Elizabeth's involvement, and so she was released. Elizabeth did return to the Tower of London 4 years later, in 1558, and the reason was that Mary had died. She came then to the Tower of London in preparation for her coronation as Queen Elizabeth I. as she was the last of the Tudor dynasty. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one trip to the tower would not be complete without, shall we say, a more colourful story of the tower, one that involves blood, gore and suffering. Bring it on! For those with a delicate disposition, you may want to listen away. The story is, shall we say, nasty. Oh, it's a Disney cartoon, actually. You know this place was built by Disney in 1937. It's plastic. You can get badges. Ladies and gentlemen, also kept in this tower here was James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, eldest of 13 illegitimate children, fathered by Charles II. Monmouth was born while his father was in exile in Holland, escaping the clutches of Oliver Cromwell, the only man who ever dared call England a republic. Now remember, Charles II was the Restoration King. He came back to England in 1660. Unfortunately, when he died in 1685, he left no heir to the British throne. He had a lot of children, but he'd had none with his wife. And therefore the throne passed to his younger brother, James the Duke of York. Monmouth claimed that his mother had been married to Charles II whilst in exile in Holland. And obviously if that were true, that would make Monmouth the legitimate heir to the British throne. So in 1685, James the Duke of York was crowned James II of England, and Monmouth landed off the south coast of England, raising an army of farmhands and labourers in what became known as the Pitchfork or Monmouth Rebellion. Sadly, ladies and gentlemen, when his army met the British professional army of the period at the Battle of Sedgemoor in Somerset, it ended in a total and utter defeat. Monmouth was brought to the Tower of London, ladies and gentlemen. After being tried for treason and sentenced to death, he spent 3 days and 2 nights in the upper portion of this tower before he too made his way up to Tower Hill, as so many before and so many after had and would do. Now when he got up to Tower Hill, ladies and gentlemen, his executioner that day was a giant of a man named Jack Ketch. Jack was of Irish birth, full-time butcher, part-time executioner, full-time drunk. On that day, he amalgamated all 3 of his skills to do a really bad job. Dear Dave, you are sacked. It's a terrible way to get your redundancy.
Say it again to the camera.
He's really cute.
And I still love you. It's a strange lesson. I'll be in so much trouble after this. I'll put some dirty jokes in, that'll get me out of there. Right, ladies and gentlemen. So then, to be fair to Jack, though, as I said before, he was a full-time drunk and he'd amalgamated all the skills. To be fair to Jack, though, as an executioner, he was more used to hanging people. The not used to hang people is sometimes referred to as a Jack Ketch knot. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, as the first blow of the axe sucked deep into Monmouth's shoulder, Monmouth looked back at Jack, realising, yes indeed, ladies and gentlemen, his day had got rather worse. 5 more blows later. It gets worse. Although some say 7, Monmouth's head was still attached to his body. It was then that Jack throws down his axe in a way of frustration and pulls out from behind his much more sharper and reliable butcher's knife. Pulling back Monmouth's head, he then continues to cut the head off by hand.
It's terrible.
I told you it's a Disney cartoon. Martin Sheen to play Catch. The head then, ladies and gentlemen, was stuck onto a soldier's pike, once severed, taken down to London Bridge, as was the custom. You'd think that'd be the end of the story, wouldn't you, ladies and gentlemen? But unfortunately, it goes on. It was then that family of Monmouth came forward. They'd like a painting of him. After all, he was the son of a king of England. So, Monmouth's head was retrieved back to the Tower of London, where it was sewn back onto the body by the Tower surgeon. The painting was made, said to be of a good likeness, although slightly pale. Not to be confused with the painting of Charles I, who was also beheaded. His painting has the stitch marks on it. I will add at this particular stage, to answer a question I did have for one of my last tours, yes, when they brought it back to the tower and sewed it back on, it was actually too late to save him, yes. Now, Monmouth, ladies and gentlemen, has the dubious distinction of being one of the few people buried in the Chapel Royal of St Peter ad Vincula with his head attached, or being detached several hours prior to that. Ladies and gentlemen, let's be heading on now down to Traitor's Gate.